Hey everyone, welcome to the Unhandled Exception podcast. I'm Dan Clark and this is episode number 38. And today I'm joined by Clifford Agius to chat about .NET MAUI and IoT. So welcome to the show, Cliff. It's been a long time.
Yeah, hi Dan. It has been a while, and you're up to 38 already. Awesome podcast. I listen to it every episode that drops. I've been listening since the beginning as well. So yeah, awesome work you're doing. Keep it up.
Oh, fantastic. It always surprises me when I hear that people actually listen.
Yeah. It's not just your mum, yeah? Is that what you said?
I don't think she listens. It would all go straight over her head. So I have to start by reading the tagline from your website, which is freelance.NET Xamarin MAUI IoT developer who just so happens to fly a Boeing 787 around the world. I don't think I can do an introduction justice, to be honest. So could you introduce yourselves to the listeners and tell us a bit about what you do?
Yeah, well, it pretty much is what you just said, actually. I'm an airline pilot for a major UK airline. So I fly the 787 around the world. Back from Baltimore a couple of days ago. And I've got a couple of weeks off now. And then I've got a trip out to Houston and then Seattle and another Seattle. And that's just this month. So yeah, I get around the world flying the 787, which is awesome. And that's my day job. And then my other day job is a .NET developer. So I'm a freelance .NET developer, mainly in the mobile, so Xamarin, MAUI, and also IoT spaces. So I get to cover those. I'm often asked how I squeeze the two together. Well, you know, if you're crossing time zones, you tend to wake up at oblique o'clock in the morning. Somewhere like Seattle, I'd be awake at 3 in the morning and there'll be nothing open. And I've got 3 or 4 hours to wait until I can even get breakfast. So that's my time I can turn my laptop on and just write some code, work on a project, write a blog post, that sort of thing. So that's how I squeeze the two together. And then when I'm in flight, it's always a good time to read docs, you know, watch a Pluralsight, because the videos are quite short on Pluralsight. Each little snippet is only 3 or 4 minutes long. So you can watch one of those between doing things with the aircraft and flying along and keeping notes of fuel and that sort of stuff. So yeah, I managed to make it work somehow, and I still get time with the family, which is odd as well. It's kind of juggling all the balls, but I haven't dropped one yet. So
I don't know whether you're allowed to answer this, but how much do you rely on autopilot so you can actually get bits of code done whilst flying?
Yeah, let's unpack that. We use autopilot. We use autopilot a lot. If you think about an aircraft and how much automation there is on board, we take off, we get airborne, and we'll put the autopilot in, typically somewhere between the ground and 10,000 feet. Sometimes a little later, but you know, typically around there. So the first 10,000 feet, the pilot might be flying the aircraft. And then the autopilot stays in all the way until we get to 1,000 foot above the airfield at the destination. Or if we're doing auto land, like if it's foggy and horrible and, you know, not very nice weather, the autopilot will land the aircraft. So, you know, the pilots are monitoring and hands on the controls ready to take over, but the autopilot will fly the approach and landing. So yeah, but we will do nothing that's not related to flying the aircraft when we're not in the cruise. So typically, like my flight to Houston in just over a week's time, we'll take off, we'll speak to, you know, London control, Irish control, like Shannon, and then we'll cruise out over the Atlantic. And then we don't speak to anyone until we get to Canada, the other side. It's all automated by the computers. So that is typically sort of 3 hours where we really are just babysitting the autopilot. That is typically when we do stuff. But when we've got headsets on and we're talking to air traffic control, we tend really not to do anything other than fly the aircraft and, you know, maybe kind of read a doc on our iPad, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah, you know, the autopilot helps. But yeah, we do have to be careful when and where we do it. So
yeah, I can imagine. So in the last episode, which was about build, which actually at the time of recording hasn't yet happened, but when the listeners listen to this, it will have. We spoke about MAUI at a very high level in amongst other build stuff. But it'd be good in this episode if we could dig a bit deeper, because we did only cover it quite at a high level in the build episode. But perhaps first, for those people that haven't even heard of MAUI, could we talk about what it is?
Yeah, so MAUI is, it's acronym, actually. It's not the island off Hawaii that you might want to fly to on board one of the jets I fly. No, MAUI stands for Multi-Platform App UI. And it's in the name, basically, is the fact that it supports lots of platforms. So you've got Android, iOS, and Windows, which are the same 3 that come from Xamarin Land. But added to that, you've got macOS, so you can build a Windows desktop app and a Mac OS desktop app. But you also, as of RC2 or 3, I can't remember which one it was now, but recently anyway, the Tizen team, which are from Samsung, has been added to the package as well, which means that you can now develop an app that will run on a Samsung TV as a native app on the TV, or even the fridge, or dishwasher, or whatever kind of Samsung devices you get, or even the Samsung mobile platform, which is prevalent across some countries. So yeah, it's multi-platform. The difference between MAUI and Xamarin, I'm asked this quite often, is why the difference? Why the change in name? Why the split? Well, Microsoft purchased Xamarin some years ago and bought it in-house, but it was always kind of separate. It wasn't really part of the .NET stack. So what they did was, it was meant to be as part of .NET 6, but obviously COVID got in the way of that. So it's kind of halfway between .NET 6 and .NET 7. And it's going to be GA'd at build at the end of May. So what they've done is now brought it totally into the .NET stack. So now it's just like your normal using system. You can now using Microsoft.mobile, Microsoft.MAUI, sorry. And that means that it's part of .NET. So they're starting to, still using the mono runtime underneath, but they're starting to bring it all into the .NET stack. And they changed the name so that they got rid of, I suppose the branding police really were upset that there's this old company that Microsoft purchased, and the brand and the name and the Xami gone, the cross inside the hexagon is, as the logo was still around. And they're, because it's now part of .NET and they don't want to be a separate entity, they just want it to be .NET and it just runs everywhere, they get rid of the branding. But the way I explain the difference to you or I as developers, it's going from Xamarin to MAUI, is if you think of Xamarin, it used to be quite clunky. There was lots of issues with it. And it got better from about version 4.5 upwards, because the team were really putting some effort into it, because they had the backing of Microsoft and the power and the money that Microsoft could bring to bear on the project. But they had a lot of history in that package, a lot of things that they really wanted to fix, but to fix them would be huge, massive breaking changes. Certainly on the iOS side, with the way some tooling had changed by, as Apple does, it brings out a new SDK and it kind of breaks the world for a few days and you've got to go and update all your apps. But that was a massive problem for Xamarin, certainly Xamarin Forms anyway. So what they did was they completely rewrote from scratch the MAUI stack. And the way I explain this is, if you think of Xamarin as .NET framework, old and trusted, only worked on Windows platform, but it worked, it was great, but they wanted to make it work everywhere. Then they brought out Core, and we've now got .NET 6. They've even dropped the Core name now, haven't they? So it's just .NET 6 now. So if you think of it, Xamarin is the old framework, and MAUI is just part of .NET 6, and will be going forward. And that's the kind of best way to describe what it is and what it does.
Cool. So you mentioned about it being GA'd in build, which at the time this goes out, that would have happened already. So that means it's now GA and ready to use in production, which is quite exciting.
Yep.
Also, you mentioned desktop applications and you mentioned Windows and Mac. Is there going to be a story for Linux desktop applications?
There is. In Xamarin Land, there was a community effort of Linux being added. So you could go out, and I wrote some apps using Xamarin Forms that run on a Raspberry Pi, and outputted some info to a screen. So you could use that under Xamarin Forms. Under MAUI, it's not there yet, but there's a community effort at the moment going on behind the scenes to add Linux. The likes of David Ort now, who's the program manager for MAUI and was for Xamarin, is very interested in hearing from people. So if you've got a story, a user journey that you want to put forward to the team and say, look, I really want to use Linux, then just go out to Twitter or email and let the team know that you really want to use Linux. Because at the moment, they say that not many people are asking for it, so they're not going to assist the community in building it. But if there's a lot of people that want to use it, then by all means, they'll listen to you and help the community build this out. So it is there, it's coming, but it'll be community driven rather than direct from Microsoft.
Well, I can include a link to the show notes to all those things you mentioned, so you can reach out and see the community projects around that. So in the last episode, we spoke a bit about this, but now you can put Blazor components within MAUI applications. So there's kind of this choice between, are you using just raw native XAML to build your MAUI apps, or are you building it up using Blazor components? Is there scenarios where you choose one over the other?
Yeah, I played a little with Blazor. I'm not an expert on it. I'm not that good, because web is not my kind of day to day. So I tend to use the native XAML, build them out once, and it runs across all those different platforms. In fact, I've just got one in test flight at the moment for a client, which is a MAUI app, which is working on their mobiles and their desktops perfectly, which is kind of cool. But for Blazor, the journey there was, if I was working with a client and they have a Blazor website, then there's no point, and they say we want to have a version for a mobile. There's no point reinventing the wheel and rebuilding it in XAML when it's already there. Then when they do an update to the Blazor app, they've got to go and do an update to the mobile app. So that would be where I'd typically say, actually, you know what, let's just run it and do it in Blazor. But the interesting bit, and we were talking about this last week at NDC conferences in NDC London, standing there with Chris Santi and just talking through, MAUI and Blazor and about how you build the two together. And for me, I think the really interesting bit is at the moment, you build a mobile app, you stick it into Android and the Apple stores. So it goes out to your Google Play and your Apple Store or the App Store. And Google and Apple take the 30% tax from the developer. So if you charge $1, they're going to take 30 cents of that dollar and keep it to themselves. And then you've got to pay your tax. So you end up with probably like 60 cents left over out of each dollar for your app. If you're selling your app for more, obviously it's a bigger percentage. But if your app takes off and you're selling millions of copies of downloads of this app, that's a lot of money Apple and Google are making off your back. The interesting thing is that if you make a MAUI app with the Blazor web view in it, you send that app off to the App Store to be reviewed and approved. And it gets approved, it's in the App Store. You're never, ever going to change the app again. You're never going to update it. There's nothing to do with the app. You might have to update it every now and again, purely because the iOS updates happen and you just need to update to the latest build standards. But that means your Blazor app that you have on your website or some Blazor backend somewhere, you can update that every second, every minute, every hour, and it'll update the app instantly. So if you've got an app that's constantly changing, constantly iterating, it's a great way to have that without having to wait for the Apple and Google reviewers. Google can take up to 2 weeks now to review your app. Apple tends to be, a day or two for them to review your app and publish it to the App Store. So you cut out that time, which means if you're constantly doing updates, it's good. But also it means that you then are not paying the Apple and Google tax, because if you then have a button on your app, which is part of your Blazor website, which says click here to buy, 10 widgets, they won't get any of that money because it's all done via your website. So I think it's quite interesting about how that's going to sort of change the landscape of mobile apps. I think more big companies will use the Blazor web view within, for example, a MAUI app to produce an app that means they keep the extra 30%. It's a massive markup they're going to keep. And I'm not sure how Google and Apple are going to stop that from happening, other than banning the web view, which I don't think they'll do.
That's quite interesting, because I think I've misunderstood how the web view works then, because I kind of assumed that putting Blazor components into MAUI, it wasn't actually a typical web view. I thought it was actually all built in, just taking the Blazor component syntax and still being part of the native app. I didn't realize it was calling out to a hosted website.
Yeah, you can do both. So you've got a standard web view, which is a bog standard, so you can just call out to any website, doesn't it? A very Blazor one. And you've got the Blazor web view as well, which then has the runtime inside it. As I say, I've only played with it a small amount, so I don't know 100% how it's working behind the scenes. But from what I've seen, you can host your code within that web view, and it's got all the WASM runtime and everything else in there. So I just think it's really interesting about how it's potentially going to take over.
Yeah, there's so many different ways of doing things. One thing I found quite interesting, and I've not played with this at all, so this is just how I believe it works, is when you've got the Blazor component in your MAUI, your component can access the state outside of that component in the same view. So like it can share like variables and various things, which is quite amazing, really, the way it interopts together.
Yeah, it's very clever, but at the end of the day, it's all .NET, isn't it? So you say interop together, but it's not really interop. It's .NET talking to another .NET over there. It's not, it's really, really intriguing how it works behind the scenes. But when you boil it down, it's just one .NET service talking to another .NET service. So yeah, it's very cool. It's something I want to put a bit more time and effort into myself and playing with and writing some blog posts about, because I think it's something that will certainly take off, because it means you can have it will be everywhere. It will run on your website, it will run on your mobile phones, it will run on your desktop, it will run on your Samsung fridge, and it's just one code base that just literally runs everywhere.
That is very cool. Most of my background is like I've done desktop apps, but not that much XAML. Most of my stuff at the moment is like cloud apps and web APIs, but I have played a little bit with both Xamarin and MAUI, but it is just been playing around. And I know when I've done Xamarin stuff, you'd have the typical WPF MVVM pattern where you've got a view model and you're doing like iCommand and all this kind of stuff. Does MAUI follow the same kind of patterns?
Yes, it does. So you have an MVVM. It's built into MAUI and was Xamarin as well. Just to point out, though, that if you are doing MAUI, unlike Xamarin, MAUI is using WinUI tool under the hood, whereas Xamarin was UWP. So it's moved across to WinUI, which means, it's staying up with latest and greatest. But if you're using MVVM, you've still got all the same tooling, just like as if it's WPF. The same, you've still got your iProperty change notifications you've got to wire up and all those good bits that, your data binding, etc. But it's all built in, so you don't need to worry about it. But a cool thing that leads on from that is the fact that if you are doing WPF or you're doing WinUI or UWP, any of the .NET kind of Windows desktop things, or indeed MAUI, then you can go out to the Community Toolkit, the .NET Community Toolkit, and under the root of the Community Toolkit, and there's a link for the show notes I'll show you, you can download or read the docs of how to use the MVVM helpers as part of the .NET Community Toolkit. And that allows you to use source generators to generate all of that cruft and code and boilerplate. So you don't need to go and wire up a iNotify property change, and if you want to change that, or wire up an iasync command, etc. You just literally put a tag above the property and it suddenly is wired up to everything, and the source generators write the code for you, and it's written correctly every time because it's done by source generators and by some super smart people at Microsoft. People that work at Microsoft that have done it in their free time, which I think is even better. It's awesome stuff, but it's really cool.
Yeah, I had a feeling that source generators was going to come up when you started talking about iNotify property change, but I didn't know there was actually an official solution. So I say official, like Community Toolkit, I think you mentioned, but it's cool that that's just out there and you can just use it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Community Toolkit for the Windows platform, there's a Community Toolkit for MAUI. There is one for Xamarin, but they're not depreciating it, but they're kind of leaving it to one side because obviously in a year or so's time, it's going to be an old, unsupported package. But if you head out to the Community Toolkit, you've got the .NET Community Toolkit, which is all the stuff which is .NET and works everywhere, like the MVVM helpers. You've got Windows stuff and MAUI stuff as well. But what typically happens is the Community Toolkit is where the community is banded together, and I'm helping with the docs for the MAUI Community Toolkit and with Sean Lawrence. And what typically happens is the community is, we want this, and they'll go and build it, and everyone else will start using it, and then Microsoft and the team within the community then say, actually, this is so good that, and it's so stable, and it gets brought across into MAUI or into Windows or into the .NET framework. So it's a kind of almost a testing ground as such, but it's community driven, which is awesome. So if you see something or you want something or you've got that tool you always use and you want the community to know about it, head out to the GitHubs and put in a proposal and write your bit of code, and you never know, it could become part of .NET in a few months' time.
Another podcast I listen to quite a lot is Merge Conflict, and James Montemagno and Frank Kruger, I think his name is.
That's it, yep.
And they talk a lot about this, where you've got like these community things and then they're slowly being brought into the official thing as they get tried and tested. It's obviously something that the community wants.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at just James Montemagno's, he had Xamarin Essentials, which was he had lots and lots of libraries. A couple of years ago, he took all these libraries, and these libraries were for things like, turning on and off the flashlight, sending an SMS from your phone, all these little things you wanted to do with a mobile phone that wasn't part of Xamarin. So he wrote all these little helpers. He then brought them all together under a community banner and called it Xamarin Essentials, because it's all the essential bits you needed. That was part of the community toolkit, and it's now built into .NET. So that has, it's gone from being just James' work at home on his own to now being part of .NET, all these libraries. And the same has happened. There's been a few things that have gone via the community toolkit and into MAUI and into Xamarin, and media libraries and media plugins and things like this are now part of the main stack as such. But via the community toolkit.
Yeah, I don't know how he does all the stuff he does, because he flies around doing talks and things. He's got his podcast he does. He obviously does a lot of different stuff, so I just don't know how he does it.
No, neither do I. He's got his YouTube channel. He twitches quite often on his Twitch channel. Yeah, he's got two podcasts, I think. He's a PM for all things .NET, and he's a busy guy. So
I'm assuming a lot of it is he's able to do in work's time. Otherwise, he mustn't be able to sleep if he doesn't do that.
He must do. Yeah.
So I mentioned before that I've tried briefly playing around a bit with MAUI, and I remember I started to use, I say I remember, I can't remember the name of it, so I'm hoping you'll know it. There was a library or something I was using which automatically gave me kind of a UI library, but it gave me the page navigation via routes and things.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, it was a library, but it's now part of .NET. And actually, it was called Xamarin Shell, Xamarin Forms Shell. It's now MAUI Shell.
That was the one I was thinking of.
But it's now, if you was to go file new projects with a MAUI app in Visual Studio 2022 preview, you have to use the preview at the moment. But obviously, this recording is coming out after build. It should actually be in the latest and greatest Visual Studio 2022. If you go file new projects, that project that comes up is going to be a shell project. That was a big push from James Montgomery, actually, because typically if you had to do navigation without using shell, there's loads of boilerplate code you have to write. You could use a library like Prism or the likes, which I've used in the past, and they're awesome. They're fantastic libraries, but there's a learning curve to that. And there's a learning curve to writing and managing navigation stack yourself. Where shell, it's done for you. You don't really need to learn too much. Within 10 minutes, you can learn how to navigate to a new page. Within 15 minutes, you can learn how to pass data to that page as well, because it just uses like when you've got a website and you've got the question mark and you've got your name value pairs. It's exactly what you do. You just pass a name value pair, and on the other end, you grab that name value pair out of the root. And if you've done any kind of web development using that, then you already know how to use shell and navigation stack. So it's really, really clever. There's some edge cases. You'll hear lots of people complain about it, saying, it doesn't do this, and it messes this up, and that's difficult. Yeah, there are edge cases, but it's the normal 80-20 rule. It does 80% of the stuff perfectly well, and the last 20%, you're going to have to drop down and use the base navigation stack yourself to make it work.
When it comes down to it, if you Google for anything, you'll hear someone complaining on the internet.
Yeah.
Years and years ago, playing with Xamarin, as I say, I've not done that much with it, but I remember all the other stuff you had to do, like, for example, what we're just talking about there was shell. You'd have to do it, having to add potentially things like MVVM libraries. I think there was MVVM cross and maybe different ones to actually do what you want to do without having to do lots of your own boilerplate code. And it's just sounding like this is becoming so much cleaner.
Yeah, it's. I was talking about this recently as well with a group of people that, like you, had used Xamarin in the past, and then gone away with it and gone off to use things like Flutter and the likes. And there's and you'll see it on Twitter. People complain about it. Oh, it's so painful, and Xamarin's so bad, so horrible. From about Xamarin 4.5 onwards, it started getting the love that it deserved, and it changed drastically. Xamarin Forms is now at 5 dot something or other. 5.0 dot something, because that's the last major release, and they're now just doing that kind of updates to security updates and patching and fixes and things like that. MAUI has started off from where Xamarin Forms 5 ended, and it's I've got a couple of apps I've got in MAUI, one that's up on test flight at the moment, another I'm building, and it's just so quick, simple, and easy. I've been doing it for a few years and I know my way around the tooling, but it's not the pain that it was before. I mean, I've still got scars from Xamarin Forms 3, I think, is where I started. Maybe even 2 point something. No, I think it's 3 actually. But it hurt. Every time you wanted to do something, you was having to write your own renderers, like your custom renderers, just to do something simple, like put a border on a button. It was painful. Whereas now it's just built in and it all just works. If they've worked out what the community and the developers have all complained about when people have gone on Twitter and said, right, I'm done with Xamarin, I'm off to use Flutter because it's so much better. They've gone and looked at all those, and created tickets for them and fixed them all. And, it's rare now that I'm using it and I'm like, I wish it could do this. And it's rare now that I need to go out and use, MVVM Cross or Prism, because what's built in does the job just as well. So again, that 80-20 split, 8% of the stuff will work. That 20% you might have to, go and use MVVM Cross and things because your app is doing something that is a bit different and out there. But to be honest, most apps show some data, maybe a couple of pictures, and there's a button. You click the button, it takes you a new page, shows you more data. You look at what some of the community is doing, like Sean has built a game. Sean Lawrence has built a game which is in the App Store, not Wordle, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's basically a crossword game, and that's all in Xamarin. He's got animations and things flip around and do stuff. That's all in Xamarin. So it's quite impressive what you can do. It's not the Xamarin Forms of old where it's just everyone said it was just there to do a line of business app which collected data and sent it to a server backend. It can do some pretty amazing, impressive things now.
Very cool. Yeah, I think I'm choosing the right time to start trying to build an app.
Yeah.
It's interesting you said about the scars, because it's kind of, well, as I mentioned before, when I played around with it quite a few years ago with Xamarin, it just felt too many pain points, where now, if it's so much nicer. I've timed it well.
Yes, you have.
So I'm just trying to think, with a typical app, you might have various different types of components. So you might have a table or a chart or things like that. Are a lot of those built into the community toolkit, or would you have to reach out to some third-party component provider?
Most of them are actually built into base MAUI. So if you want to have a table, you can have a list view or a collection view. You can build out quite complex tables and the likes. Graphs, you can draw that using MAUI.graphics. So you can draw your own graphs now. I was looking at that the other day for a client. We used a NuGet package before, and I can't off the top of my head remember the name of the one we used. But it was good, but it didn't really draw the graph they actually wanted. It drew a nice bar graph or a line graph or a scatter graph, but they wanted something a bit different, and they wanted it to animate. So as the graph showed, the bars grew on the screen, and it's a bit different. But now actually you can do that with MAUI.graphics. You can draw it, and for those that may know, think Skier and Skier Sharp, which is like Google projects. MAUI.graphics is basically meaning you do not need to bring in the Skier library into your project, which is a large kind of library to bring in. And most of it get linted out, but you're still a large package to bring in to draw graphics. It's now part of MAUI. You don't need to bring that in. As for other things, like maybe one of the projects I'm working on at the moment, the client app needs to open a PDF document, annotate over the PDF document, and then save it back to the server with the annotations, or show some date time collectors, which are in MAUI as default, and it uses a default time picker for iOS or Android. So it looks like an iOS or an Android time picker, but they wanted some funky ones there. And we're just using, you can go out and get your Sync Fusions and your Telex control libraries that you'd use if you're doing a web project, but they've also got the mobile ones as well. I can never remember which way around it. I think it's Sync Fusion, isn't it? Where it's a community version. If there's less than 5 devs and you don't make more than $1 million,
yes,
it's completely free. So I tend to use that. And again, I'm certain that Telex got something similar. It might be lower numbers. Dev Express, they've all got packages that work for MAUI, and they're awesome tools. All kind of much just all got the same sort of controls, but they're great tools to bring in and use.
It is Sync Fusion, because I'm using it for one of my clients where I'm just building their software, and it's just me for my company. And so, because me being one person, that means I can get that for free. But it's amazing that they're doing that I can use their components for free.
Yeah, I had the conversation in the before times at an NDC conference, and the Sync Fusion team was there, and I said that I'm building this project for a huge company. It's just me building it via about 10 different kind of subcontractors. I was the person at the end of the food chain. And I said, there's just me. I'm going to own the code bases on my GitHubs, but they're a huge company and there are thousands of employees around the world. And they was like, yeah, it's fine, as it's just you and you own the code. But if you give them the code base, they've got to pay for the license because they're a big company. So it's about who owns the rights to the code is the delineation, certainly for Sync Fusion anyway.
That's pretty cool. So if you're doing a desktop application, let's pretend it's 1 or 2 years in the future. So this is a bit more mature. Would you always reach for MAUI to do a desktop application? Or I know you've got WPF now, but I think there's WinUI 3 and all this kind of thing. When would you reach for MAUI versus just doing one of those natively?
I'd reach to MAUI now, even if it's 1-2 years in the future. If it's today, I'd go and reach for MAUI, purely because I'm going to get the Windows desktop and the macOS desktop with the same code base. And if the client comes back a month later and said, this would be really cool on a mobile app, or we want to use it on our iPads or Android tablets in the office as well, it's done, it's built, it's working. So I don't think I'd go and just develop for WinUI 3 now or WPF. I'd just use MAUI. That's me personally, but I've got experience in building with Xamarin and MAUI. But if you haven't, and you're coming from the web world or some other world, and you're thinking, you know what, I'm going to build a desktop app, then MAUI kind of gives you everything out of the box.
Yeah, hopefully at some point in the future, there'll just be one way of doing things to get rid of all this confusion. But yeah, totally agree about this cross-platform side of things.
Yeah. Wasn't that the promise from Java some many years ago? And Oracle, didn't they promise you write it once and it runs everywhere?
I think that promise has been made lots and lots of times, but it'd be nice to actually see that actually work for once.
Yeah. It seems to be going that way. I'm super impressed. I've been playing with the previews of MAUI since kind of the single digit numbers, so around kind of 6 or 7. And it was painful. Things were breaking. Your tool chain broke often. But since about preview 13, I know it's an unlucky number, but it seems to have been the one that landed. And through the RCs, there's been some breaking changes, which the team have told everyone we're changing this because we decided that actually that doesn't fit, that doesn't work, or we've realised that actually it clashes with this over here. It's other than those, which you'd expect because it's still not GA'd, and that's their chance to do it. It's been bomb-proof, even more bomb-proof than Xamarin Forms was, which, considering it's a complete rewrite, all I can think is Dylan Beattie now, the big rewrite, sung in my head. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go out to YouTube and just Google Dylan Beattie, the big rewrite, and you'll know what I mean. Sorry for ruining your day and your YouTube hole that you're going to go down listening to Dylan Beattie. But yeah, it's impressive what they've done. And as I say, the way I explain it is .NET Framework versus .NET Core, and about they did a complete rewrite, and now everyone's using Core and not the framework. So impressive work by all the Microsoft team.
Yeah, very, very cool. So another thing you specialize in, as well as MAUI, and it was in the tagline we mentioned at the start, is IoT. So how does IoT fit into this?
Well, if you think about your mobile phone, it's basically a computer processor with lots of sensors attached to it. So it'll have an accelerometer, it will have a GPS, it will have, it's got a speaker, it's got a microphone, some of them have barometers. It's got lots of sensors and bits on there. You've got the output of a torch, a flashlight on the back. So it's basically an IoT device that's in your pocket. We'll carry it around and we think, it's a mobile phone. And we tend to think it's more of its close analogy is a desktop device, but actually it's closer to IoT because of what it is, because it is, it connects to the internet and it's a thing that's in your pocket. But I've been playing with IoT probably longer than I've been playing with .NET and like C#. I did an engineering apprenticeship with Ford Motor Company. So as part of that, we was trained in electrical and mechanical engineering. The electrical side of it was where I tended to lean because, I had an interest there. And they taught us electronics. So we'd be programming like PIC and AVR, our Atmel microcontrollers. So that was when you go and write it in C, and then you go and plug your chip into an EEPROM burner and burn your code to it. And it was a single chance. And then, if your code didn't work, that chip was dead, you go and get a new one out of stores. So, you checked and made sure it all worked correctly. But now, stuff I'm doing now is, it's using boards from lots of Adafruit and PRJC or the Tinsy boards. You can get them from Amazon. You can get them from lots of places. Pimoroni is another place where you'll go and you'll spend lots and lots of money and end up with all these boxes of bits. So, but what I've been doing lately, and my talk that I gave at NDC London recently, was around using Nano Framework and the Wilderness Labs Meadow F7 board. They're both using .NET, so you can take your existing C# .NET skills and write code that work on an IoT platform. Slightly different ways of attacking it. So Wilderness Labs is the team that run that company are from Xamarin, before Xamarin was bought by Microsoft. And what they've done is taken the Xamarin stack of using the Mono runtime and .NET base class libraries stacked on top, and they've basically got that to work on an STM32 chip, which is a weird little chip, which will run on a battery in a field and quite happily leave it there for a couple of months on a little battery, a little LiPo battery, put a solar cell on it and it'll run forever and a day. And it's your C# .NET skills. So you're writing much the same as you would write a Xamarin app. You're writing normal .NET code. So when you start the app up and you're going to write the code, it looks and feels just like a console app. And the reason for that is because if you think about IoT, there's typically not a screen. Typically, it's just sensors, and you're reading sensor data and connecting to the cloud and sending the data to the cloud. So it looks and feels just like a console app, and you can do your normal, new up a new class, do whatever you want to do, and you do your generics, you do your JSON, stringify and all that sort of stuff. That is how things work across in the Meadow framework and how they do things. The downside to Meadow, the only downside I can see is the fact they're a single source supplier. So you have to buy the Meadow boards from Meadow or from Wilderness Labs, but it's phenomenally good. I'm torn between using Meadow or Nano Framework, and my only kind of reason for going Nano Framework sometimes is, is Wilderness Labs going to be there in a year's time? But they're about to go RC, I believe. They've been in beta versions for quite a while now, and it's starting to get some traction. I know some people are now starting to talk about it. People contact me, so it looks like it's going to work. I think it's awesome, and it'd be great if it does. Nano Framework, though, it's a bit different. Nano Framework it's a .NET Foundation library. supported, and it's all in the community. Some people that work on the IoT team for Microsoft, some externals as well. And what that is, they've taken the C libraries that make up and run on, again, the ESP32 or the STM32 chips, and they've put .NET wrappers around those libraries, which means you can still do all the native things you can do if you're in C sharp. In C on the device, but it's wrapped with C sharp. The downside to that is things like generics don't exist. And the reason for that is because they need to make the library, because an ESP32 doesn't have a lot of RAM, not a lot of flash. You're talking, 128 kilobytes of flash RAM, which isn't a lot. Way more than the computers I started on, the VIC-20s and stuff, but still not a lot these days for our code. So they've stripped out bits of the .NET runtime that isn't going to be needed and used, so it will fit on these small devices. But you can go and pick up, and I did it recently, ordered 3 ESP32 camera boards from Amazon, £18 delivered to my door. And these are little ESP32 boards with a camera on board the device. So you've got a little 2 megapixel or 5 megapixel camera there. And you get 3 of them for £18 delivered to your door. And then you can just load up the tool chain and write your C# code, and you're off to the races. You can do what you need to do. The other advantage also is Nano Framework is purely C# because they've only done the C# wrappers. If you go to Wilderness Labs, because it's mono and the base class library is .NET runtime, you can use any .NET language. So if you're an F# developer or have a big VB, then you write your code in your language of choice, and it will compile and run and build and work. So that's the other advantage of using the Meadow over Nano Framework. But at the moment, for me, mentally, they're very close. But it's kind of what your project is doing and which one you choose. Yeah, or you can just go back to using Arduino and see. But that is many sleepless nights and lack of hair.
IoT is just something I've never really played with. Quite a few episodes ago, we had Pete Gallagher on, and he was talking about IoT and teaching kids to code and various things like the microbit, MakeCode and Tinkercad and all that kind of stuff, which seemed really cool. And I did do a bit with my eldest son. So you mentioned earlier about a box full of like little wires and gadgets and stuff. I've got one of those boxes just over there. But yeah, it's kind of I need to play more. I guess I kind of like, just because I've not spent a lot of time doing it, I've kind of jumped in. Okay, I can turn some LEDs on and off, but then it's kind of, I suppose it's the next step where things probably start to get more interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is. And the thing is, me and Pete sort of complain about this quite often. You look at IoT kind of blogs and tutorials. They start out with the hello world of IoT, which is blinking LED, which you've done. And then the next thing is you take a BME sensor, which is a pressure and humidity sensor, and you read the temperature of the room, and you send that to the cloud somewhere. What do you do? We now know how hot it is in the office. And then they tend to stop, and they tend to not go very much further. They say, right, that you need to know, off you go, see you later, bye. Which drives me nuts. Pete as well. So when I give IoT talks, I will never ever use a temperature sensor, humidity sensor, because I just think they're boring, because the temperature in the room is going to be around 21, 22 degrees, and that's it. The humidity is going to be wherever it is, 40, 50%, and that's it. So at my talks, I'll drive a servo, and that servo will be connected to a 3D printed arm, and part of that is we've now got a little robot on our desk that can move around. If you go up to my GitHubs and look, you'll find all the libraries, all the code for doing that on the ESP32 and at Wilderness Labs, as well as 3D files you can download and play with. But yeah, so you then take that and you go and grab your oldest and you put a robot arm in front of them and say, right, here's how we write code. Here's the arm. Make it dance. Make it do something. And they'll be there for hours. My 2 youngest have played with it and written C# code to move sugar cubes around. Like pick a sugar cube up and put it into another box, and then go back and get another sugar cube, and that, because that's fun. Blinking LED and reading temperature and sending it to cloud is not fun. Pete's got an awesome talk that he gives where he's got the same robot arm, because we built it together, the same files which my oldest son edited and designed. So all you need is the servos and the 3D bits. You don't need any other springs, screws or bits and bolts. So his talk is where he connects it up to a SignalR process and then a Blazor app. So anyone around the world while he's giving his talk can go out to his website and move the servos and the robot that's sitting on his desk in his office. And it just shows the power of what can be done with technology and IoT. But you're right, a lot of people look at it, and I have clients that I talk to, and they're like, we just don't get IoT, don't get what it is. But then you talk to them, you say, well, what do you do? Well, we've got all these trucks that deliver all these things around London. Okay, well, where are all those trucks now? Well, we rely on the driver's mobile phone and where they are. So you're tracking the driver and their phone, not the truck. So if the driver was to leave his phone on the desk in Costa Coffee, you know where his phone is, but not where the truck is. If the truck was get stolen with all the goods in the back, the driver's standing there, you don't know where the truck is. So why not have an IoT device that's fitted to the truck that measures where it is, measures things like its fuel state, so you know how much fuel being used. Another project I've worked on is shipping at sea. They wanted to measure where the GPS signal of where the ship was, so that they could make sure they purchased the correct charts for the ship rather than purchasing the global charts or all the North Atlantic charts. They just got those for the shipping they know is going to use, and then track the ship. An odd one as well was the fact that the ship's captain writes ship's log. We're all Star Trek fans, aren't we? Ship's log or captain's log. Give the star date, but that comes from the fact that real captains on real ships and aircraft as well write ship's log, and they'd write the fact that there was a 4-7 gal and 5 meter swells, etc., etc. So they drop anchor and they stay put. They don't try and get to destination. They just stay where they are, ride out the storm for a couple of days, and go to port. But ship's crews are typically paid a day rate. How many days are at sea is how much they get paid. So if they're at sea 5 days longer because they got stuck in a storm, they get paid more. Awesome for them, but not for the shipping company. So they'd write, we're stuck in a storm. But then when they looked at the weather charts, there'd been no storm. But the ship's log and the captain's log is a legal document. So what they asked me to do was, can you track the pitch roll of the ship and record that with the GPS signal data, and then once a day just put that all up to the cloud, so it all goes up to Azure, and then we can see if they're stuck in a storm because the accelerometer data will be going off the charts because this ship is bounced all over the place, and we know that they've stayed in position because there's GPS. That was at sea not very long before we caught a couple of captains out that had said they'd been in a storm and they weren't. And when they interviewed said captain and tracked them down, it turned out it was one of the shipmate's birthday and they were having a few drinks. So it's little things like that actually you think, oh, IoT is pointless, but little things like that now means that the rest of the crew know about it, so don't practice that anymore, which has saved the company untold amounts of money. I don't know because I never got involved in that side of it. Another one I've worked on is tracking sheep. So when they get all the sheep into the sheep pen, they want to know that they've got all the sheep in there. There isn't one hiding behind a bush somewhere in the field. So we just put RFID tags on their collars, or like sort of the kind of collar tag things that they have in their ears and around their tail and stuff. And as they come into the pen, the RFID tag reads it, and because it's out in the field in the middle of nowhere, that's connected via a LoRaWAN, which is basically a long-range radio signal back to the Wi-Fi back at the farmhouse, and then sends the data up. And then the farmer can see on his mobile phone that he's got all the sheep in the pen, or he's missing, Flopsy, who's hiding behind the bush somewhere, and he's got to go find them. So there's lots of projects you can use it on, as well as obviously controlling the lights behind you when you're doing your Twitch stream. That's probably what most people are doing with it.
Yeah, so certainly a lot more use cases than my flashing LED.
But that's where we all start. That's the gateway into IoT.
It's quite interesting you mentioned about the servo talking to the Blazor app via Signal R. Coincidentally enough, just before COVID, I was planning to do a talk at .NET Oxford, the user group I run. This would have had to be an in-person event, obviously. And it was me and an ex-client who's now a friend. And he plays the guitar and he's quite into like lights for doing gigs and things. So he's got a bunch of those with servos. And he was going to do that side, writing the IoT code. And I was going to do, funnily enough, a Blazor app with Signal R, which the audience could participate and control the lights from their phones, but it would have just been a web app on the phones that they can go to. And that sounds almost identical to what you just described. Yeah. But we never ended up doing it because COVID hit.
Well, but COVID's still here, but there's nothing to stop you doing it now, is there? It's little things as well, like, I've worked with clients where we've done projects doing hot desking, and this is come around during COVID, and we're just still in the process of deciding if they're going to do it or not. It's down to funding at the moment, but that project is where their office, because they've downsized their office because everyone's working from home, we're going in a couple of days a week. Now formulated the office differently, such that it's hot desking. And when you walk into the floor plate, you'll look at a screen on the wall and it'll show you which desks are free and occupied, which ones are being booked out, at what time. That one's free now until 2:00. Then, Sandra's booked it out for a couple of hours this afternoon, that sort of thing. And what we're doing is, you go into a car park, you go into the modern car parks now, they have that little kind of green or red LED above the parking spaces. You can look above the cars and see there's a parking space down the end of that aisle. And that's all we've done, is we've got an IoT device. We've done a proof of concept, and it senses whether there's someone sitting at the desk or not, puts a red or green light above, but it also talks back to the server, and then the screen on the wall shows which desks are free, and then it's integrated with calendars, so you can book it out from home, saying, I want that desk by the window on Thursday afternoon because I like to look out the window and watch the birds instead of working, whatever it is you do. But yeah, it's things like that. And then also knowing the fact that, there's no one at any of the desks, so turn all the lights off because there's no one in the office. Save energy, save electricity, turn the AC off because, the temperature is cool enough. We don't need it to be running. Just little things like that. Building management systems is typically what most IoT gets involved in, but it's the other fun stuff that people don't realise you can do.
So when you're saying about integration, are you hooking into things like Azure IoT Hub and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so typically Azure IoT Hub is where I send most of the data. You can do it with IoT Hub or IoT Central. IoT Central is basically more of a, what you see is what you get, kind of, click and drag kind of stuff.
Like software as a service or platform as a service kind of thing?
Yeah, platform as a service. It's an easier entry. IoT Hub it comes in, the data comes in, and then you've got all your devices, provisioned, and they're there, and you can see them, and they're sending data. You can't see the data. You then need to have an endpoint that the data from IoT Hub goes into, be that Cosmos DB or Time Series Insights or wherever you send that data. And then it's there where you'll see the data, not within IoT Hub. Whereas IoT Central, you can see the data arriving, and you can then kind of decide where that's going to go and how it's going to be formulated before it gets sent off somewhere, etc., etc. So yeah, is that, or if you're on AWS has got an offering as well. I must admit, I've only briefly played with it, the AWS one, and I got very confused very quickly because the docs are, dare I say it, shocking. They're not a patch on docs.microsoft.com, and yeah, I know they're working hard to make it better, but yeah, they just weren't very good. So I couldn't get done even a simple projects on AWS, having years of experience. But yeah, hopefully they get that fixed, because it'd be nice. As we all know, you kind of want the big companies to be competing against each other in the same space, because it then drives each other to be better at what they do. At the moment, Microsoft is walking it and AWS are floundering. But hopefully they resolve that and fix it, and then give Microsoft a bit of competition in the future.
Cool. So you started talking a bit about using IoT for your hand.
I did, yeah.
Like your prosthetic hand, which I believe is called Handy.
It is, yes. So Handy, if you look out on YouTubes and stuff, you'll find talks I've given about this. Basically, a few years ago, my kids went to the same school as Caden, and his mum knew that I do software, knew that I do 3D printing, and at the time there was a news story on the BBC in the UK about, and Sky News and that, about a dad that 3D printed a prosthetic limb. So she was like, "Oh, you've got a 3D printer, haven't you?" I was like, "Yes, I have. Yes, I have, Sharon." And it moved from there. So it started with 3D printing a limb for Caden, and it moved from him being kind of 10 going on 11 to actually having a fully automated with servos and feedback controls and controlled from his muscles. So he just tenses a muscle and it drives the servos and changes the grip on his hand. A mobile app was written in Xamarin, which I'm going to move to MAUI when it GAs. And yeah, so it's a prosthetic limb. But instead of it being tens of thousands of pounds or dollars or euro, wherever you are in the world listening to this, I can build one now for under £500. I'm just in the process of changing some of the motors to these different servos, which have taken another £200, £250 off that. So we could be talking less than £300. It's all 3D printed. So as Caden's grown as a child over the years that we've been doing this, he just says to me, "Cliff, it's getting a bit tight now." And I go and click print and print the socket, which is the bit that attaches to him. And we've worked out that 5% tends to be about the right number to size it. So I just scale it by 5%, which I do on the printer software. Click print, 80 pence, so less than £1, less than $1. And about 5 hours later, we have a new socket. During the COVID times, I was literally just dropping off at his door, and his dad, Paul, would connect it all up for him. It's like 4 screws and a couple of little wires. It'd take him about 20 minutes to connect it up, and then Caden would have a new socket, and the arm would be good to go again. And off it'd be without the uncomfortableness of a socket. He still wears and still has the offering from the NHS, National Health Service. That costs around £6,500 for the arm. The hook, and it is literally just a hook on the end, which just opens and closes. Think like a bulldog clip that you use to hold your papers together. It's not much different to that. And that costs £2,500. So you're not getting much change out of £10,000. Every time he needs a new one, which is about once a year, he goes back to the hospital. He goes for a measurement where they take a scan and produce a cut that goes on him. And then a couple of weeks later, they produce the arm again. So it's another £6,500. And obviously all the work that the technicians that put into it and the time of cading it backwards and forwards, hospital 3 or 4 visits to get his new arm. So that's a huge cost every year for a child. And kids tend to grow. It's what they do, as well as eat everything in the house. Yeah, so now we're down to 80 pence and the arm stays the same. He's broken a couple of fingers just because he was showing off what he could do with it. But, they're pennies to print and, take about half hour to fit a new finger. Yeah, and it all runs off a power brick that we all have, when we go off and do stuff that you plug your mobile phone in to charge your mobile phone up. So it runs off a 5 volt power brick. And the biggest problem he has when he's at school is the fact that his friends would often want to charge their phones. So his battery would run flat because he was charging everyone's mobiles up and his arm then didn't work. But yeah, I mean, it's good because he now works, and this is the bit that actually makes me really proud of the project. He now works in a kitchen at a local pub because he wants to be a chef. Now, he wants to be a chef with only one arm. So how do you hold the tomato, the apple, the round objects with a hook, with a bulldog clip? You can't. Whereas now with Handy, he can hold the tomato, and he's actually created his own grips where he holds it in a certain way that he can now slice the tomato, slice a cucumber, slice an apple. And that for me is just awesome. The fact that IoT, a mobile app, and a bit of my time, and some others have helped along the way, doctors and that at Roehampton and Liverpool hospitals. Yeah, it's quite impressive what you can do with technology and with IoT. And if you're interested, there's blogs on my blog site, my website, and GitHub is out there. You can go and download all the bits, all open source, and go and build your own. Any change I make, I always make sure I commit it back to GitHub as well. And the links will be in the show notes. I'm sure you've already got them done as well.
Yeah, that is absolutely insane. Well, it's life-changing. Life-changing and career-changing. If the career he wants to get into, he couldn't have done without this. Very impressive.
He could have got he could have gone along to the NHS and gone through when he gets the job seeker's age. He could have gone back and fought a case and said, I want to do this career, and they'll look into giving him a full prosthetic, which is professionally made, not the ones that they normally have, but this is where they get an external company to make them. But they're tens of thousands of pounds. And, if he breaks it, he's then got to go back and plead for a replacement or a repair. This is, it's pennies to fix. He's still got the same components inside his arm now that he's had for the last 3 or 4 years now. We've not changed them at all. The hardware, it's just the 3D plastic parts that we've fixed and changed. The next step of this, and this is what should have happened in summer 2020, was I've got a 3D printer on my setup in my workshop, which I purchased, and I've got a box with all the bits that needed to produce these arms and a couple of spools of filament. And we're now working with a hospital in India and Pakistan, a place that I fly to on the 787. And the idea was to take this box with the printer and all the parts and deliver it to the hospital. Over the course of a few trips there, show the technicians, the doctors and nurses in those hospitals how to print prosthetics for the children locally so they can produce them and help the kids locally. Because at the moment they get nothing, because there isn't that provision there. They don't have the facilities that we have at the NHS. And yes, people in the UK complain and moan about the NHS, but it's for what it does, it's an awesome, awesome medical health service. Yeah, and we're also working on Leggy, which is a prosthetic leg, and test cases my uncle. And the problem with having that is not the dynamics of the foot. And next time you walk, think about what your foot is doing. And I guarantee you, as soon as you start thinking about it, you'll fall over because you're thinking about what your foot is doing. But just watch someone walk and watch what happens with the foot, how it lifts, how it pivots. And it does all that without you even thinking about it. But trying to automate that using IoT and tech, we've got weight sensors and strain gauges, etc., has been a challenge that makes the hand look simple. But then also you've got to carry the body weight. My uncle's a big lad, and trying to carry the body weight in 3D printed plastic has been a bit challenging. We've had a few failures where he's kind of stepped on it and it snapped. We've had others where we changed to an aluminium rod that sat between the 3D printed parts, And he used that for a wee while, and it wore through the 3D printed element, and then the rod stuck through the end of his leg. That was quite painful, he tells me, with swear words. But it's a work in progress. We're not there yet, but we're kind of working to see if we can get a 3D printed prosthetic leg as well. And that has very little in the way of electronics and actuators. It's mostly 3D printed components. So that would be even cheaper than the hand. So yeah, it's cool. It's a great fun way to learn tech and play with tech, and I've really enjoyed the process. And the fact that it's given back to people and changed their lives, as you say, is it's just been icing on the cake, really.
I think where you've been saying it's amazing what you can do with IoT, the average developer isn't going to do that. So I think a massive hats off to you for actually taking this stuff we can do with IoT and absolutely transforming people's lives. So yeah, absolutely incredible.
At the end of the day, though, it's just C# code. It's not, well, actually, it's not C# at the moment, it's C. It will be C# soon, very, very soon, because we're switching to the Wilderness Labs boards. But yeah, it's just code. You think you can't do it, but I guarantee you, if you had an issue where you need to do this, you need to, sort it out for, one of your children or a friend's child, and you got to chuck that problem. I guarantee you to solve the problem. Because we're developers, it's what we do, it's what we love. We love to solve the problems and fix things. And the worst thing anyone can say to a developer is that can't be done, because we all know that we'll find a way. We all do. We'll like, no, I can fix it. I can work out how to do that.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, exactly. Hold my beer and off we go.
So looking through our shared Google Docs notes, the last thing you mentioned on your list was how the stuff you've learned in aviation, like the skills and tricks, can help you in the dev world. I don't know whether that leads on to our dev picks as well.
It doesn't lead on to my dev picks, but it does lead on to sort of things that we do in aviation, things like checklists, things like having, in the dev world, we'd have like a code review. In the aviation world, we have a post-flight review. So at the end of every flight, no matter how good or bad it's been, we will always take 5 minutes and, what went well, what could we have done better, what would I keep for next time, what would I change for next time. I've been flying planes for 20 years commercially. And every time I go to work, there's always something you think, oh, you know what, next time I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do it this way. And Heathrow hasn't moved. It's been exactly the same place, same bit of tarmac. But every time you fly into it, there's something that, the weather's suddenly different. It's like, you know what, next time it's like this, I'm going to do that. We have checklists for everything in aviation. There's nothing you will do on an aircraft that would not have a checklist. I go and work in a team, embed myself in a team as a freelance developer and start looking at how they're doing things. And they'll kick off to production. And it'll be a DevOps pipeline, and off it goes and builds and publishes. And off it, it's now in a big bad world, but it's not checklists for that. They just push to GitHub and off it goes. There might be a few gates, QA gates, etc., in the DevOps pipeline, but again, there's not a checklist for have you made sure that you've done this? Have you made sure that you've made sure there's no keys in the code? Whatever it is that is special to your process, such that when it does get to the QA, they're not kicking it back and saying, well, you've forgotten this or that doesn't work. Just simple things you can have a checklist for. I've seen people push code to production and it brings down the server and it brings, everything crashes because they've just missed a simple step. And they instantly, as soon as you say to the dev, oh, it's crashing and this is the error code, oh, I know what it is, I've forgotten to do this. And they'll go and change it and it'll be working minutes later. But if you had a checklist that said, make sure you do this, make sure you do this, make sure you do this. Have you committed to the correct branch on GitHub so the code's picked up by the DevOps pipeline, that sort of stuff. So checklists is a big thing. The other thing that I've started kind of pushing towards teams I've worked with is simulating things. I don't mean running a simulation of your app, running on localhost, that sort of thing. What I mean is every 6 months we go into a simulator and we practice everything, from engine fires and failures to complete electrical hydraulic failures. And we have to know the drills, follow the checklists, and safely land the aircraft at an airport nearby. And I've got mine in a few weeks' time, so I'm back in, 6 months clock is up. And I hand my license over, and therefore my career as a trained team. And at the end of the 2-day check, hopefully they're signed in the box and I get my license back and go and fly passengers again. But we don't do this in the dev world. What I'm advocating for is you have your infrastructure all set up, and that's you have a production one, maybe you have a dev and a test one, a QA one. But it's all there and it's all running and off you go and you use that. What I'm advocating for is you stand up a completely new instance, not part of your production test environment or QA environment, a completely new instance. And did this for a company a little while ago, and I stand up a new instance and he looked at me blankly and said, we can't do that because we've gone into Azure and we've AWS, they were on, and we've clicked all the boxes. We don't have infrastructure as code. It's like, well, there's your first problem. Solve that. So they come back a few months later and say, oh, you solved this. Yeah, I can build an instance. So we've learned loads about our infrastructure. It's like, well, there you go. You've learned just by doing that process. Now you have the infrastructure built up. Now get all your teams together in an office environment and get them just to sort of monitor the system, and then go in there and turn things off, break things. You have like a team that's sitting to one side, the training team, that will just literally break stuff. And then have the other teams. The first team that finds the fault gets points. The team that works out how to fix the fault gets extra points. At the end of the day, the team with the most points wins a prize, or whatever it is you do internally yourself. I've done this for a couple of teams now, and not only have they learned how their infrastructure is running, they've generated boards and boards full of tickets of things that they need to fix and change. Be it that there's not an error message when the database isn't there, or actually it generates an error message to the end user, which is not what we want the end user to see. Or actually we could have fixed that by restarting that microservice or spinning this up so that they don't see an error message, they get something else, historical data as opposed to what they should have got. All these sorts of things, and it's because they simulate and they practice and they see what's wrong. Junior devs then get brought along on the journey, and they get to see how everything works. And it only takes a day or two out of the team's life, and everyone kind of learns and grows from it as well. So that's what I'm advocating. I've given a couple of talks on it as well. Just try and kind of get teams to take what we do in the aviation industry and practicing things and testing failures. Because it's different. It's not what your QA team normally do. And the QA team, typically in these environments, are saying to the devs, look, we always see this and we just ignore it now because you haven't fixed it. Well, actually, that's an easy fix. Let me go and do that, and I can go off and do it. The important bit is, though, don't try and fix it in the room. Just generate lots of tickets for your Kanban board or whatever you use and go back and fix them later. Don't try and fix them there and then on the day, because you're ultimately trying to learn and have fun. But yeah, that's the kind of aviation bits I've brought across the teams that I've worked with.
Yeah, I'll definitely plus one for the checklist. I do quite a few talks on developer productivity, and I talk a bit about to-do lists and also differentiate between, because they're not the same thing, to-do lists and checklists. So I try and have like checklists for so many different things, like definition of dones for tickets. I have a checklist for the start of the day when I start work, just basically planning the day, checking my email, checking the calendar, but just a very simple checklist, just so I know I'm being consistent every morning. I've got one for the end of the day, and I've got a whole bunch of checklists. But I think it's very important to mentally separate out the difference between a to-do list and a checklist. They are very powerful tools.
They are very powerful tools. So the to-do list is what you're planning to do, whereas a checklist is, I've done this. And the way you should use a checklist is you use a checklist when you've completed everything. So you carry out the operation or the flow sequence, you move all the buttons and switches, or you do whatever it is you've got to do. And then the checklist is it's in the name. You're checking that you've done all of those. So you shouldn't use a checklist and your checklist is open my email, make coffee. And then you go and open your email and it's like, next one is make coffee. I'll go and make coffee. It should be, I've checked that I've done all of these items. And it's a subtle difference. But if you're using it as this is what I've got to go and do next, you're using it more like a to-do list. You're not checking. And the problem with that is while you're off doing that thing, like making a cup of coffee, for example, and you come back, you've forgotten where you are on the checklist. Whereas a checklist, you should be able to complete in seconds. You should be able, have I done this? Have I done that? Have I done that? Yes. Oh, I haven't done that. Okay. I've failed at my task. I'll go off and, fix that and come back, and tomorrow I'll do better. So.
Yeah, I think also like a to-do list is generally things you might just do once, or like once you've done it, you've done it, where a checklist is more like a list of steps for a specific thing. So for example, another checklist I have is at the start of a podcast recording. I've got a list of things that I want to do before I join the recording call. And it just means I've got that consistency, but you can also refactor it and iterate it over time, improve things. And I generally find that the more correct my checklist is, the less stress I have, because I know I've not forgotten anything, because I can see that I've ticked off each of these items in the checklist. So yeah, it's very powerful. Another thing I remember from when, this was quite a few years ago, you did your talk at .NET Oxford, and I'd actually already read this book at the time, but I remember you talking about it in your talk. There's a book called The Chimp Paradox.
Yes.
Which is a brilliant book, and I can include in the show notes for anyone that wants to listen, but I would definitely highly recommend that.
Yeah, it talks about how my talk that you're referencing there, again, you'll probably find in YouTube and that, but it's talking about how we make critical decisions as human beings. And what happens is when you're presented with something that's, instantly the chimp wants to be involved, and the chimp is your fight or flight response. It's your kind of inner caveman, cavewoman kind of response of am I going to run away? Am I going to fight this? And that's what the chimp does. And it's a shortcut. It's the things that we train the chimp to do, like changing gear when you're driving a car. You don't really think about it anymore. The chimp does it for us. But it gets spooked really easy, and then you'll just do something on reflex, or you do something quickly because you've got to try and think to save the day. But typically, what you want to do is stop, take a deep breath, and let the human, which is slow and still waking up, think of it like a teenager. I don't like waking up in the morning to wakes up and gets there and say, "Oh, what are we doing?" So that is what kind of Professor Steve Peters talks about in the first kind of few chapters of his book, is this chimp paradox. So, you think that you hear a loud bang when you walk along the street, you're in a chimp will make you jump without you even thinking about it. It's just a reflex action, or duck or something like that. And then your human will kick in and say, oh, it's that car that's juggling along the road, therefore it's backfiring and it's okay, I can relax. Or actually it's something more sinister that's going on. So yeah, it's that kind of response technique, and the trick is, like I say, is to take a deep breath. In aviation, we say wind our watch, sit on your hands, just give the human a few seconds to catch up. It's really, really hard to do at first, to just not react, but just take a few seconds. One trick that you can do, and I do when I'm not on an aircraft flight deck, is close my eyes and take 3 deep, slow, long, deep breaths. It reoxygenates your blood, so your brain can think, but also means that you've got that kind of calming influence. You just calmly just close your eyes, 3 deep breaths in and out, a couple of seconds each way, and then it's like, right, what am I dealing with? And it works with family as well. When the wife's screaming at you or the kids are screaming, it's like, Dad, help, do this and that. It's like, deep breath, right, okay, now I can deal with the situation. Because otherwise the chimp's going to jump in and ruin the day. So feed it a banana, give it a deep breath or 2, and you should be good.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about kids as well, because I've got 2 kids, and I really noticed this. You mentioned about the human brain having a chimp side and a human side, like a logical thinking side, and you can tell that children, the ratio is much higher to the chimp in children. They're so much more driven by emotion. And you can see that, like, maybe not all adults, but you can see that as humans mature, you can see that ratio. So the human logical side starts to get a bit more control, hopefully.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually. Yeah, you often see the kid on the floor in a supermarket screaming, arms and legs waving everywhere, and it's like, well, what they're complaining about, the fact they want Fruit Loops as opposed to cornflakes or whatever it is. But yeah, and then the human is as they grow and they evolve, and that takes over. But yeah, it's as you say, it's a great analogy. Actually, I might steal it from you.
I find that useful as a parent, though, thinking about those ratios and just accepting the fact that children and they're much more driven by emotion, and that ratio between the chimp and the logical side, just accepting the fact that children are more driven by the chimp side. As a parent, that helps me not get so cross because I can understand it.
Yeah. So it helps in, kind of all walks of life, not just, flying an aircraft or as a dev, but yeah, as a parent, as a, dealing with friends and family and what's going on in life. But yeah, it's just taking that few moments. If you can steal a few moments to yourself where you can just take a deep breath and contemplate what is in front of you before you go and deal with it, the outcome will be so much better, because you'll have thought it through. The humour would have kicked in rather than being an emotional response and emotional reaction. And yeah, like you say, if you read the book, it's a fantastic book that explains it all.
Yeah, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes. So we are kind of almost running out of time. So shall we do dev picks?
Yeah, I've got 2, but I think you covered one already, and I think you've talked about it on the previous one, which was Zoom It, which is the Windows sys-internal things that allows you to draw. You've probably seen lots of Scott Hanselman drawing arrows whenever he's doing a YouTube talk. So Zoom It, just Google it, and you'll Google Bing it, and you'll find Zoom It, which was one. But you told me at the beginning you've already covered that one, so I'm just highlighting it to anyone who knew. But the one for me, which I use, and I didn't realise other people use it until I was talking to people last week, is a package or an install for Visual Studio. I know you're a Rider person, but I'm sure there's a Rider version of it as well, which is called Conveyor from Coyote. The link's in the show notes. And what that does is, if you've got a web API and you want to test it, you F5 in Visual Studio, whatever, I'm assuming it's a similar key pressing Rider. I've not used Rider for a while now. And you run your app and it runs locally, and you have that moment of, yeah, it works on my machine, let's ship it. But if you're doing a mobile app, you can't test against that because an Android phone won't connect to localhost. yeah, or you want to test it on another device to make sure that web app's working, but you don't want to stick it up in the cloud because you haven't done all the cloud infrastructure yet, but you're still waiting for it to be built out. You just want to test it locally in the office or in your office at home before you go and push your code somewhere. What Conveyor does is it works in Visual Studio and it runs the app, but it gives you a network IP address to that running instance on your device, which then means you can go and grab an iPad or another laptop and connect to that IP address on your network within the office and see the app as if it was deployed to the cloud, as if it's deployed wherever you're going to stick it on an endpoint. But it gives you a proper real IP address, HTTPS and all the other bits and bobs that you kind of want your app to have, rather than you running it as localhost. It's an awesome tool. It's fantastic if you want to test a mobile phone app, Xamarin or MAUI, because you can connect it. But also, if you're testing like a web API and then you want to go and stand up another instance in another version of Visual Studio or Rider to call into that API, you're calling a normal IP address as opposed to localhost. So you've not got all the things that localhost does that thinks are trying to help you, but actually just hide bugs that then produce themselves in production. So it's a fantastic tool. It's a free version for it. It's just an install, but there's a paid for version as well, which gives you a few other things like doing a cloud version of it as well. So you can connect it via the cloud, so it doesn't need to be someone on your network that connects from their office, wherever they are in the world, to your machine in your office in front of you via this IP address. That's a paid for version. I paid for it purely because I think it's a fantastic app and tool. It wasn't much. I think it's like $40 or something like this. And I just think that the team deserved money from me because it's such a cool tool and I use it daily. But yeah, go out and look at it. It's called Conveyor from Coyote.
Yeah, it sounds quite interesting with where you're dealing with local host and you've got to have the port number as well if you've got multiple services. So you can't just go into your host file and create an IP address entry for like a temporary host name, where if this is doing separate IP addresses, I tend to just use Nginx locally to get around that, but this sounds like an easier solution. It sounds very similar to ngrok as well, I guess.
I've not used ngrok, to be honest, yet, but yeah, it basically means you can go in and you can even give it an IP address that you want to give it, how it would appear on your network. So I've got mine set up so it appears on my network and I know it's always that address. So it's easy for me to set up and connect to. But yeah, you can go out and it just appears on your network as if it was the cloud service that you're ultimately building. So your other devices, certainly for IoT and mobile, is fantastic. But like I say, for doing kind of microservices or a web API, it's pretty decent as well.
Yeah, I think with ngrok, well, maybe you can do this, but I've tended to, with ngrok, just run it on the command line, where this sounds like it's just, you've got the full IDE integration, so it's just much easier to get started, so that sounds quite nice. But yeah, I'll definitely link to that in the show notes. So my dev pick today is the NDC Conferences YouTube channel. So at the time of recording, NDC London was last week, and I was extremely envious. I believe you were there.
I was.
At NDC London, but I was seeing all tweets going out from various people at NDC. So I couldn't go, unfortunately, but luckily they do publish the videos to YouTube. And at the moment they haven't been published, but I can see they've already created a playlist in YouTube for NDC London, and I think they put a couple of keynotes in, but they've not put the rest yet. But I believe I think you were saying earlier in our chat beforehand, they normally take a couple of months to appear, but I'll include a link to that in the show notes because, yeah, seeing all the tweets on Twitter, I can see there's an awesome lineup of talks there. So I'm looking forward to catching up.
Yeah, it was great to be there. It was great to be back in person at a conference as well. And NDC, I've been to quite a few conferences. NDC are, the best, I think, at what they do. But yeah, they tend to take between a couple of weeks, a couple of months to publish some more there. Some they hold back, so if they know the speaker is going to be speaking at one of their other conferences, they'll hold back the YouTube release because obviously that speaker wants it not to be out there on YouTube until they're giving it a few other places. So I know that happens as well. But the other thing they do as well is they do their very own dev picks. So they must have listened to your podcast, Dan, and thought that's a good idea. We're going to copy that from Dan. What they do is they've been asking at certainly NDC London, they will be doing the same at NDC Oslo and Porto and places like that, is they got the speakers to just do a quick, less than 5 minute YouTube thing about some dev pick of theirs. So I did one on Zoom It. So I quickly showed how to install Zoom It, how to use Zoom It to zoom in and draw boxes and arrows on your screen. Scott Hanselman has done one. So, they've gotten all their speakers to do these little 5 minute shorts, YouTube shorts, which are up on their YouTube channel as well. They're different kind of developer productivity tips. So they must have stolen it from you, Dan. That's all I can say.
So I have 2 listeners. I've got NDC and I've got you. Fantastic.
You've got way more than that, Dan. Way more than that.
No, I'm really looking forward to watching those then, and maybe I can pinch the dev tips back because sometimes it's quite. That's why I've changed it from dev tips to dev picks, because I was running out of things.
Yeah.
So I think dev picks gives a bit more scope, so I can actually call out open source projects and that kind of thing. So that's quite cool.
Yeah. But you was sort of Unhandled Exception podcast has been on the .NET podcast app as well and pushed out by them. So you must have many listeners now around the globe. So your listenership must be up quite a bit as well.
Yeah, their Twitter handle has just started tweeting out, which was absolutely amazing. When I saw that, it completely blew my mind. So yeah, they've got, I think, hundreds of thousands of followers. So I was quite chuffed about that. Yeah, I'm quite lucky really it seems to have got quite a lot of traction, and the listener count is quite good. So, but I think all the credit goes to the awesome guests I have on, because it's definitely not me.
It's definitely something to do with the way you put it together and your style as well. So from us that do listen, thank you. It's an awesome podcast, and I tell lots of people about it as well. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's great to hear. So where is the best place for the listeners to reach out to you if they want to get in touch and find out? Well, obviously we'll put links to Handy and all this kind of stuff in the show notes, but if they want to reach to you directly.
Yeah, I can make a hand to come and get me. The best place to get me is probably on Twitter, so at Clifford Agius. On GitHub, all my projects I have up there at Cliff Agius, so it's just Cliff as opposed to Clifford. But yeah, they're the 2 places you'll find me. I've got a blog as well. It's just my name, cliffordagius.co.uk, and I blog about things. I've done the last few blogs has been about building a MAUI app from nothing and talk you through the differences to Xamarin. So yeah, and I'm doing a few more blogs at the moment about taking that MAUI app and putting it up to Azure DevOps. But things keep moving at the moment, so I'm waiting for them to settle down and calm down and stop moving around, so I can write a blog post and it's actually what is going to be GA'd and published. So I'm just waiting for that to happen, and then I'll be happy to release the blogs that I've written on the DevOps side of things. But yeah, it's they're the best ways to get a hold of me, or find me at an NDC conference somewhere.
Awesome. All the stuff you do. What would you do without the autopilot?
Yeah. Not the dev stuff. That's certainly not. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, so massive thank you for joining us. I've really enjoyed it, and I kind of really need to go and play with some IoT. You've motivated me. I'm going to play with some IoT.
Yeah, some IoT and some MAUI and mobile apps and get them to connect together. That's what you want to do.
Yeah, definitely. I just need more time, but yes, I'll bring it up in the to-do list, not the checklist, the to-do list.
Yeah, don't sleep. It's overrated. That's the thing you want to do. Give up sleep. It's like 8 hours of your day you're wasting.
Well, isn't it? Is that Arnold Schwarzenegger that just says sleep faster?
Yeah, that's it. If you want another quick dev tip, dev pick, if you want a really scary book to read Why We Sleep. I won't ruin it for you, but it's a very interesting thing that what the body does and how the body recovers. But yeah, interesting book and pretty darn scary at the same time. So yeah.
Yeah, this is one, like every time I do like my developer productivity talk, at the end I talk about nutrition and fitness, but also sleep. And I always point out that book. It's such a good book. I mentioned actually, when was it? It was a few weeks ago. I was on the .NET Core podcast as a guest. First time as a guest on another podcast, so that was quite exciting. And I mentioned that at the end. And Jamie Taylor at the end, who's the host of that podcast, said that, yeah, he had read it too and he had found it absolutely life-changing, which I can't agree more.
Yeah, the scary thing for me is the fact that I tend to have lots of nights out of bed, awake, crossing the Atlantic or coming back across, what was, well, when it was Russia, we was allowed to fly through that, but not anymore. You're wide awake at 2 o'clock in the morning when the body's supposed to be asleep, repairing itself. So yeah, reading that book and all the things that can happen to you if you're not sleeping, it's quite scary for me.
Yeah, well, when I read it, it was quite a few years ago, and I can't remember which of my kids it was, but it was the time when I was getting hardly any sleep because one of them was a baby and just not sleeping. Neither of my kids slept at all. But yeah, when you have no choice, reading that book is not a good read.
Definitely not. So I've got teenagers. They make up for it when they get to teenagers. You can't get them out of bed.
I haven't got to that point yet, but yeah, it sounds amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Well, brilliant. So thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's been brilliant. And thank you everyone else for listening. A quick reminder that this podcast is sponsored by Everstack, which is my own company providing software development and consultation services. For more information, visit everstack.com. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please do help me spread the word on social media. I normally use the hashtag unhandledexception, and I can be found on Twitter at Dracan, which is DRACAN, and my DMs are open. And my blog, danclark.com, has links to all my social stuff too. And of course, we will include a link to all the things we've mentioned today in the show notes, which can be found on unhandledexceptionpodcast.com.